This is CBC Here and Now.
A third death in the province from COVID-19 as the federal government releases its pandemic projections.
Well, Karen, we've seen it happen in St. John's as well as the Burin Peninsula, and now in Harbour Grace, a drive-through testing for COVID-19. The province is ramping up.
Good evening, I'm Carolyn Stokes. We start tonight with details of a third death from COVID-19 in the province. A 65-year-old man in the eastern region died this afternoon. He had been admitted to hospital from his home and he had pre-existing medical conditions. Now let's get to the latest overall numbers. 4 new cases of COVID-19 were announced today, bringing the total to 236. And another jump in the number of people who are recovering. 96 people are now considered recovered from COVID-19, up from 74 yesterday. Now, this province released its COVID-19 projections yesterday, suggesting the peak of cases may not arrive until late fall. Today, the federal projections are out, and that shows a different timeline. The federal government expects peak cases nationally by late spring and the end of the first wave of cases by this summer. The federal chief medical officer says smaller outbreaks are expected in the months that follow. The projections suggest 500 to 700 deaths by next week and between 11,000 and 22,000 deaths in Canada over the course of the pandemic. And they say to expect quarantines and physical distancing measures to be in place for months.
There will likely be smaller outbreaks for a number of months after that. This will be the new normal until a vaccine is developed. It will take months of continued, determined effort.
So, which is it for Newfoundland and Labrador, spring or fall? Let's bring in Here and Now's Peter Cowan to explain this disconnect in the projections. Peter.
Carolyn, I guess we're used to being half an hour later in Newfoundland, but what we're talking about with COVID-19 is being a few weeks behind the rest of the country here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I think that's one of the issues that we're seeing with these projections. Other places like Ontario, Alberta, British Columbia, they're seeing the big surge in cases. That's happening right now. It makes it easier to predict when that peak is going to come, and so a longer projection like a weather forecast, the farther out, the farther it is to project. But here's how the health minister today here in Newfoundland and Labrador explained the difference today.
At some point, the numbers will start to tick up faster each day, the so-called exponential growth. And when that happens, we know we're between 3 and 4 weeks away from a peak. The other thing we know is the sooner that peak comes, the worse it will be.
Okay, so there's been a lot of debate about whether we're doing enough testing in this province. What's being done to address that, Peter?
Well, today we had an announcement from the Chief Medical Officer of Health that they're going to expand the testing criteria because right now there are testing centers like the one that was just set up in Harbour Grace. It's by appointment only though, and you don't need to just have the symptoms, you also need to have traveled or been in contact with someone who has the disease or be a healthcare worker. Now, today, Dr. Janice Fitzgerald says they're going to expand that criteria to capture more people so they can do more contact tracing, but just who is going to be eligible, they haven't figured that out. So, Carolyn, we're expecting that in the next couple of days, they'll explain what that new testing criteria is.
Thanks so much, Peter. That's Here and Now's Peter Cowan reporting live from the newsroom. Well, here's some good news. So far, there have been no new cases of COVID-19 connected to a long-term care home on the Burin Peninsula. Earlier this week, we learned of one case at the U.S. Memorial Health Center, but the health minister says they're still tracing contacts.
The residents have all been tested, as have the staff. Contact tracing is still continuing with some of the edges of that, as it were. All the tests that have been done have come back negative thus far.
Well, people who aren't working from home are trying to ensure they maintain a physical distance while on the job, but that can be very difficult for pharmacists. That's what Anthony is looking into for us tonight.
Well, that's true, Carolyn. It's hard for any of us to do our jobs normally these days, and that's particularly true for pharmacists. Here We're outside the pharmacy on Topsail Road at the Sobeys, where there was one positive case of COVID-19. It got us to thinking about what it's like to work in those tight areas where the dispensaries are located. Joining me now is Debbie Kelly. She's a professor at Munn's School of Pharmacy. So, Debbie, give me a sense. What's it like being a pharmacy, and are pharmacists on the front lines now?
Oh, of course, absolutely. I think like all healthcare providers right now, pharmacists are no different. They're feeling a little bit more anxious. But they're taking steps to be prepared. They're following social distancing and physical distancing, and they've made modifications to their workflow in order to protect their patients.
As far as the pharmacist and the pharmacist technicians go, I sort of think of the dispensary where I get my medications for people, or even where I go, and it's really tight back there, and some of them almost like a broom closet. How do you maintain 2 meters distance working in a pharmacy?
No doubt it's tough. Certainly talking to my colleagues out there, I think every pharmacy is adjusted just a little bit differently. They're making full use of dispensaries. They're having folks work in stations, so there's minimal crossover in order to go through the prescription filling process. Some folks in smaller dispensaries have actually reduced staff. So having maybe one pharmacist and one assistant or technician in at a time in order to maintain that space between them. And in addition to that, they're looking at changes to scheduling. So doing team-based scheduling in many stores so that the same pharmacist and staff members are working together in the event that someone comes down with COVID or is a contact and needs to go in quarantine. The entire pharmacy doesn't need to shut down.
Right.
So there's a lot of changes. We've seen plexiglass installed in pharmacies, and we're really asking the public to make sure they respect that barrier, not reach around or talk around the plexiglass, and that's for their protection too.
Well, Debbie, you've been in touch with pharmacists that you know. Any stories, anecdotes about how they're doing things differently to go the extra mile during this pandemic?
Certainly. So we're hearing a lot of stories about pharmacists doing multiple prescription extensions and renewals more than ever before. And regulations have changed that now they can even extend controlled drugs, which wasn't possible before. Sometimes delivery staff aren't accepting payment at the door now. So pharmacists are dropping off prescriptions at the beginning and end of their shift. I heard one story of a pharmacist who has a lot of clients that just don't have credit, so they couldn't call in payment. And he went out and bought the Square for his phone so that he could personally drop off prescriptions and they could pay at the door with a debit card, so that person didn't have to leave their home. And doing lots of consultations over the phone now. We're really encouraging people to call in for advice and to ask for prescriptions to be renewed over the phone as opposed to arriving in person. We're hearing reports about how COVID is affecting smokers, not surprisingly more disproportionately and more severely, and pharmacists are providing advice for smoking cessation. They can even prescribe therapies to help people quit smoking.
Right.
So many ways that pharmacists are helping people now.
Right. I guess a pandemic, if you haven't quit yet, maybe a pandemic's the right time. Listen, Debbie, appreciate your insight. Now, tomorrow we're going to talk about how pharmacists are helping among the most vulnerable clients, and those are people who need methadone treatments. Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thanks so much.
Well, of the 236 cases in the province right now, about 75% of them can be linked back to one location. Call's Funeral Home hosted 2 wakes and a funeral over 3 days in mid-March. People were there to grieve. They hugged, they cried, and they shared food. Now, some mourners have become patients. Others are facing online shaming and hate. Ariana Kelland has been looking into the Call's cluster.
When we talk about the more than 160 cases related to calls, it doesn't necessarily mean that every one of those people attended the funeral. It means that it could be a contact of a contact of a contact. And we've already seen that this virus, through calls, has infiltrated our postal system to some of our healthcare workers. Dr. John Haggie says we're still seeing cases related to this 3 weeks out because oftentimes the incubation periods overlap. So he does expect us to see even more cases, though that number is trickling off. Now, for the families of those 2 people who were waking at calls, it's been a nightmare on top of a nightmare. Shannon Fleming died at the age of 36 from complications from diabetes. I spoke with a couple of Shannon Fleming's friends, and they describe her as a baker, an auntie to their children, and a fighter. Her lifelong friend Debbie Williams came home from Texas for the funeral, but she did not get sick. But she estimates about 300 people came through the funeral home during the one day, and over 100 people signed the guest book. So just think of all of those hands on the one pen signing that book. Williams knows about 20 people personally who are sick. She says most have flu-like symptoms, but there are some more cases where people are more severe. And unfortunately, among that group are some of Shannon Fleming's own elderly relatives, and some of those people have been hospitalized. And then there's this man, 78-year-old Edward Tobin. He was a father, grandfather, great-grandfather. His daughter Heidi said that he was an excellent father. Now, for the Tobin family, they are also grieving the loss of this man, Larry Walsh, the first man to have died of COVID-19 in our province. He was 78 and a retired RNC officer. So both sides of this family say no one is to blame, and they want to remind people that they see the comments people put online. Dr. Janice Fitzgerald has said multiple times that no government regulations were violated at calls, but it does appear that this large cluster, one of the largest in Canada, will continue to grow over time, but hopefully those numbers will slow down soon. Ariana Kelland, CBC News, St. John's.
The lockdown is to keep the residents inside the community because it's very important with this virus that's out there to keep everybody home and safe.
That's Chief Eugene Hart from the Sheshatshiu Innu First Nation in Labrador, providing one of his regular video updates to residents during this pandemic. The community has been on lockdown for nearly 2 weeks with a bylaw in place restricting travel to the community. Chief Eugene Hart joins me now. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us. Can you start by talking about this lockdown? What are the rules for residents right now?
Thank you for your invite for me today on your CBC. The lockdown procedure that we have in place with the bylaw is because we were wondering first how to do this because we wanted to do it right. The gate is totally closed unless you're going to outposts or you're going camping up on the road to isolate yourselves with your family.
So the idea is that people can leave the community, but getting back in is the problem, right?
Yes. If you leave for no particular reason, you got to have a good reason to come back in town.
So this is a much more stringent approach than other areas in the province. Why do you feel it's necessary to lock down the community like this?
I just feel for community overall, where we have a lot of elders and a lot of youth in our community and a lot of people with health issues, I think it's very important to educate them how this is important for our community.
And can you talk about those videos that you've been posting to social media? What's the purpose of doing that, speaking to the community like that?
So I go on live on radio or YouTube, and I translate for myself as I'm speaking how it's important to stay home and self-distance yourself and to keep your community healthy.
And not all the videos that you've been posting to social media are just to relay information or to educate. It seems some of those videos are meant to lift people's spirits as well. How important is that right now?
Well, this is all new to us and it's new to me, but we're trying to do different activities for the community. Like last week we had snow sculpture for each household to do something in front of their lawn. Still stay their distance, but just the family that's in the household. In our culture, we're so used to having big gatherings, and this is hard on us.
And how are you enforcing the bylaw? Like, do you have checkpoints set up at the border to check on people who are coming and going?
Yes, we do have people hired. There's two entrances there's two ways you can come into Sheshatshiu. But there's security on each side of those roads.
And how are people there reacting to these restrictions, to the lockdown? Are people following the rules? Are they okay with this?
You do have hiccups along the way because when you look at it, we have about 85% of Sheshatshiu supporting the lockdown, which is a big, extreme number for me because this is new to us, and I know people try to challenge. But that's what comes with politicians. People's going to try to challenge you no matter what you say.
Well, Chief Eugene Hart, thank you so much for joining us today and for telling us what's happening in your community.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Welcome back. Well, there's a highway fatality to tell you about tonight. One man is dead after a single vehicle rollover on the TCH just west of Grand Falls, Windsor. It happened this morning just before noon. Emergency officials used the jaws of life to remove the man's body from the vehicle. The RCMP is trying to piece together what happened. Well, to other news from Central, a retro-themed diner in Grand Falls, Windsor is shaking up its business model. It's asking for donations so it can make takeout meals for frontline healthcare workers and keep its lights on in the process. Here and Now's Garrett Berry explains the pay-it-forward approach.
First, he sent fried chicken to a long-term care center, then hospital staff and ambulance drivers.
There are a lot of good smiles, a lot of big smiles on their faces and a lot of thank yous on Facebook, and they send us pictures and tweets and stuff.
Yesterday, it was the animal hospital and the cancer ward.
Recognition is nice, but, I'm just trying to do our part.
He was on the verge of shutting down, but then a cash donation from a cousin.
And I said, well, time times are tight. I said, I don't want to take your money. I said, unless you want to go to a good cause.
So he paid it forward. Soon, another donation, and another.
I think as of yesterday, I got $1,900. So we've done 170 meals. I still got like $300 left to play with. So I'm donating, I think there's another 14 meals going today and then another 15 meals tomorrow.
Strickland's only been in business a couple of months, and this was supposed to be his first big money-making summer. Obviously, those plans are out the window because the focus now is on staying alive. The dining room is closed, and all the staff were laid off. But with the wage subsidy and these donations,
It's helping me pay the bills and keep the doors open for the public and keep a couple workers going. And the biggest thing is that we're helping the community and feeding those essential workers. So I'm happy with what we're doing.
back inside, it's not enough to turn a profit. Strickland isn't taking any salary at all. But this is his business, so he's not going to just lock the doors.
I put everything I have into it. Everything I own, we started from scratch. We had no deep pockets or nothing. I got loans like everybody else. And if I close, I got no money coming in. If I'm open and do a couple $100 a day, well, then that's better than nothing.
And he's hoping what goes around will come around.
To be honest, down the road, I'm hoping that people remember that we're trying to help out the community, and in turn, the community will help us out.
Garrett Berry, CBC News, Grand Falls, Windsor.
Ashley is here now with a look at the weather forecast. And Ashley, you're outdoors again tonight, and it looks beautiful out. You don't even have a coat on.
It is way too nice to be inside, but stay close to your house, obviously. That's the plan. But yeah, I'm in my backyard again today. I had to get out and enjoy this sunshine because it was an absolutely gorgeous day today. We did see some areas of cloud cover, though, across the province. Let's take a look at where we sat daytime highs. 3 degrees was the afternoon high in St. John's. It certainly felt a lot warmer than that on my back deck here for sure. But numbers across the board, about 5 degrees in Corner Brook today, 1 in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, and then Lab City, same temperature. So we're getting closer to warmer temperatures, that's for sure. If we take a look at the systems, the weather systems that we have on the go right now, we've got that area of low pressure that's starting to move off now, and the next one's moving in. So we do have some areas of cloud cover in the northern peninsula as well as most of Labrador. And as we head through the night tonight, it's going to be fairly quiet. We should see areas of generally partly cloudy skies. Again, we're going to see some flurry activity probably for the northern peninsula as well as Labrador, but overall that should taper off, and then we'll start to see that next system roll in. It's going to bring some cloud cover with it by the time the morning rolls around, and also some strong winds as well. So we do have a number of wind warnings in place. Wreck House area, you can see gusts near 150 kilometers per hour, and then 100 kilometer per hour wind gusts pretty much extending through Gross Moor and along the south coast and then up through the Bay of Exploits as well. And those windy conditions will continue through most of the day tomorrow. Now this system is going to bring some snow with it. We're looking at about 5 to 10 centimeters through areas of central and along the northern peninsula. Otherwise, a good 5 centimeters, less than that as you head towards the west coast. The Straits as well, you're in that 5 to 10, potentially 10 plus range. As we head through the day on Friday. And then rainfall wise, we're looking at about 20 to 30 millimeters of rain with this one, mainly for the southern Avalon. Parts of the Burin Peninsula, you could see that as well. That's where that rainfall warning is. We're looking at the rainfall warning for mainly the southern Avalon. Again, 20 to 30 millimeters expected. Otherwise, that's just a special weather statement, and those temperatures are going to climb. So we're looking at about 4 to 6 degrees. That transition from snow will be fairly quick through the day, but again, it's those windy conditions. We have nowhere to be, so this one shouldn't be that big of a deal as far as weather goes, but certainly something to keep an eye on. As we head into Saturday, the warm spell continues. We're going to see temperatures between 3 and 5 degrees for most of us, with the sunshine peeking out. And into Sunday, it looks like we're going to see even more sunshine, so that's certainly good news there. Wanted to share this photo from Stuart Reed of Tug Pond, just outside of Clarenville. Physical distancing, enjoying a snowmobile out there. Thank you so much for sending that in, and if you have any weather photos to share with us, send them to nlphotos@cbc.ca.
Another beautiful scene. Thank you so much, Ashley. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Welcome back. Well, Easter Sunday is coming up, and today the Premier had a special message to all of the children in the province about the Easter Bunny.
Some of you contacted me this week asking me if the Easter Bunny is going to be able to visit. And I can tell you indeed the Easter Bunny is an essential worker, a very important essential worker. So I checked in with the Easter Bunny this week, and although it's tough and difficult, Easter Bunny, fast and quick, not sure if he'll get to every home around the world, but will do the very best job.
So there you go. Well, we'll leave you tonight with a performance from the Newfoundland and Labrador virtual choir made up of more than 350 students across the province. Thanks so much for joining us. CBC News from Nova Scotia is next.